guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are going to be doing a Zodiac themed project. I recently got commissioned to make an Aries piece and I thought it would be a really fun video. Also, I thought if you guys really liked it, we could probably do the other 11. So if you guys want to see any specific Zodiac signs before any others, let me know down below. Anyways, let's get started. Okay, so the first things that I'm going to start on are going to be the clay pieces. And before we even start on the head, we need to start on the horns. So I'm going to be making those real quick. One thing that you should be aware of when you're making horns is they can easily get really heavy. And it can be a bit of a pain when your clay head is too heavy for your art doll. So I highly recommend when it comes to making large horns, make a wire frame first and cover it in a bunch of tinfoil for the bulk of it. Because you don't want to add a ton of clay to the horns. You want to have them as light as possible. So I ended up sculpting my horns out of wire and foil first and then covering it in a thin layer of clay. And then I could start adding the details and all the grooves and lines and stuff like that. I actually had a lot of fun making these horns. I think they're probably the curliest horns I've made so far, and I think they came out really good. Anyways, I'm gonna get our horns baking and then we can start on our clay head. And for our clay head, I also have a lump of tinfoil for the base, and I've got it attached to a glass container so I have something to hold on to. So I'm gonna get this covered in clay too, blend everything together, and we can start shaping the face. Right now, I'm not trying for anything super detailed, I just want to get the basic shape laid out. And then once I'm happy with how that looks, and the horns are done baking and have cooled to touch, we can kind of push them in place on the clay head. So for this, I ended up cutting the wires a little shorter, and I just took one horn, pushed it in, and I took the other one and pushed it in, and just kept adjusting them until they were nice and even. Once I like the placement of the horns, I'm then going to take a strip of clay, go around the base of the horns, and kind of blend everything together with it. Then we can start working on adding the eyes, mouth, and nose. Now, the main reason that I wanted to add the horns first before doing this is when you push the horns in, you're going to end up moving the clay around quite a bit. So if you have all your facial features already sculpted, they're going to start moving around when you start pushing your horns in place. So it's best to make sure that you have your horns in place first and then sculpt the rest of the face, if you're wondering why I did that. Now with this piece, the only features that I'm going to sculpt are going to be the main ones. I'm not going to add any fur texture to it, mainly because I like to fur my faces with the fabric that we use for the body. So I'm just going to make sure that the key features are all sculpted and I'm happy with how they look, and then I'm going to put the clay head in the oven for another bake. So we already have the horns baked, but we're going to bake everything again at 275 Fahrenheit for about 45 to 55 minutes. And while those are baking, I'm going to start sculpting all the hooves. So for the hooves, I'm going to start off with a piece of wire, that way I have something to hold on to, and it makes it easier to add these to the wire frames later. So I have my piece of wire and I'm going to start adding clay to the ends of them. I'm going to start adding more clay to the front of the hoof and just try and build it up a little bit. Right now, I'm just adding the bulk of it, and then once I have that placed, I'm then going to take my tools and break it in half to create those two cloven pieces. For the back of the hoof, I'm going to take two pieces of clay and make the other pieces of the hoof. So I'm just going to place those onto the back of our foot, and I'm going to blend them in with everything else. I'm going to use my tools, clean them up a little bit, add a little bit of detail to the bottoms of the hooves, and then I'm going to put these in the oven for about 45 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. Okay, so we're done sculpting all of our clay pieces, and now we're going to move on to painting everything. So the color scheme for our Aries is going to be black with golds and reds. So I'm going to start by primering all my clay pieces black, and then we can start adding detail on top of that once it's dried. So even though I'm going to be furring my face, I do want to paint everything, just in case some of the clay kind of peeks through. You want to make sure that it's the color of the fur and not just like white plain clay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding some highlights to the face. And a good color to use as highlights for a natural black would be a brown, maybe even a bit of a reddish brown. So I'm going to start using that and just going over the face lightly, and then we can start kind of lightening it up closer to the end of the nose. And then after I add my highlights, I want to go in and kind of clean up the shadows around the nose. So I want the inside of the nostrils and around the mouth to be a darker color. So I'm just going to go in and kind of clean all of that up, because when I put my highlights on, it just kind of went everywhere. After that, we're going to move on to more of the funner details. So I'm going to start on the eyes. So the person that commissioned me wanted them to be red and to have a little bit of gold in them. So I'm going to start with a dark red first, and I'm going to paint the entire eye, and then I'm going to slowly brighten it up as we get closer to the middle. So I'm trying to blend it from a dark red to a very vibrant red. Once that's dried, I'm then going to sketch out where the pupils are going to go. I'm going to paint those, and then I'm going to also add that gold around the pupil. While I was waiting for the red on the eyes to dry, I did go over the horns with a gold. So I just kind of lightly brushed on some gold and went over everything, trying to not have it go into the cracks and crevices because I wanted those to be darker. And then for the hooves, what we're going to do is we're going to be painting these gold. Now you're probably wondering, why did I paint them black already? Wouldn't it have been better to just start off with the gold? But I've found that painting gold on top of darker colors, it just kind of turns out better. A lot of the time it'll be a little bit more translucent, so it's harder to cover up the pale colors of the clay. So I just kind of like to primer everything a darker color before going over it. Anyways, I'm going to get those painted. Once everything's dried, I'm then going to take some resin. I'm going to resin over the entire hoof, and then with the face, I'm going to resin over the horns and the eyes. I'm going to leave the rest of the face where it's not resined. That way it's easier to glue the fur into place. Now the resin is going to take a while to cure, so while we're waiting on that, let's get started on some of the sewing. So right here is the pattern that I sketched out to make the body of our ram. So I've tried to leave it as simple as possible, where we mainly have the body, a tail, the legs, and then a piece of fabric for the belly. Oh, and also a pattern for the ears. We can't not have ears. So I'm going to use this and get all my fabric pieces cut out, and we can start sewing everything together. So the main fabric that I'm going to be using for our ram is this kind of longer, almost curly black fur fabric. So I'm going to start off with the body pieces first. I have a left and right in the belly piece, and we're going to connect all three of these together. And then for the legs, I want the lower portion of the legs to be a bit shorter, so I'm going to use a shorter plush black fabric for this. So I have the pattern cut in half for all the leg pieces, and I'm going to connect these first. So I'm going to sew together our leg pattern pieces, and then I'm going to take our leg pieces once they're put together. We're going to take an inside portion and an outside portion for each front and back leg, and we're going to sew down the fronts of all of them. And then the tail is really simple. I'm going to have the underside just the shorter fur fabric, and then the top portion is going to be the curlier long fur fabric. I'm going to sew these two pieces together, flip it right side out, and add a little bit of stuffing to the tail. Okay, so at this point you're going to want all of your clay pieces to be done curing from the resin, and we're going to start putting everything together. So for this, I have a pretty simple wire frame. It's a little reinforced because the head, even though I tried to make the horns as light as possible, it's still pretty heavy. And what we're going to do is we're going to start adding everything to the wire frame. So I'm going to start with the fabric body. I'm going to figure out where the wires for the legs need to go, cut some holes for those wires, and we're going to slide our fabric over the wire frame. We can then take our clay head and we can glue it to the end of the wire for the neck. So I'm going to get that in place, let it dry, and then I'm going to take the fabric for the neck and start gluing it around the base of the head. And then once we have that in place and dried, we can start stuffing and closing up the body. When we get to the end, we're going to sew our tail in place. Now adding the legs for this piece is going to be a little bit difficult because normally I like to shave the sides of my body to make it a little bit easier, but I want all that wool on our ram. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and trim around where I'm going to connect the legs just a little bit with my scissors, and we're going to start sewing the fabrics for the legs in place. So I'm going to start with the front legs first. I'm going to get that fabric in place. Then what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the wire length to make sure that it's the correct length for the leg, connect our hooves to the ends of those wires, just wrapping everything together. Once those are in place, we can then take the fabric for the leg and glue it around the base of our hoof. Let that dry a little bit, and we're going to stuff and close up the backs of our legs. For the back legs, we're going to do basically the exact same thing. Okay, so now that our body is all put together, now we need to fur and finish up the face. So I'm going to add some ears first, and these ears were basically made exactly like how we made our tail. They're just a little thinner, and we didn't use the longer fur fabric, we just used the shorter black fur fabric. So I'm going to glue these in place, and then I'm also going to start cutting pieces of fur fabric to fit on the face. And this is mainly for the top of the head and the bottom of the head. Once we get kind of more closer to the other features, I'm then going to use fur trimmings. I'm just painting on some glue on the face where I want the fur trimmings to go, and then sprinkling or pushing in the fur trimmings with a pair of tweezers. Now, if you just wanted to make a normal ram, you're pretty much done, but we're going to add a little bit more decoration to our piece to try and make it look a little bit more like a fantasy type creature. So for this, I'm going to add a bunch of chains and decoration and kind of armor to the body. So I'm going to be using kind of this metallic felt that I found, along with a few other different pieces and some chains that I want to use to just make it look a little bit more decorative. So I have all of this kind of cut out to go around the face and body, and I start sewing and gluing everything together. Now the only problem with this is I found that it was just a little too bright. So what I ended up doing was I took a little bit of black paint and just lightly went over everything to kind of make it look a little bit dingier. It was just too bright for the rest of the gold that was on the ram. Okay guys, and here is our Aries ram. I had so much fun with this, especially all the little decorative bits. It was just really fun decorating something, just making it look really interesting. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, this piece was a commission, so he is not for sale, but I still have a bunch of other creatures in my Etsy shop, so if anyone is interested in giving one of my creatures a new home, check the links down below. I also have a bunch of links to different art supplies that I like to use to make my art dolls. So if you're interested in giving it a try yourself and making your own art doll, go ahead and check those links out. Now these are affiliated links, so if you do buy anything through them, they do help support the channel. Also, don't forget to let me know what zodiac sign you guys want to see next. I don't really have any particular order that I want to do them, I just want to see which one you're more interested in. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!